Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you were well. Rainy here in Texas. Hope it's better in your neck of the woods. Today, I want to dive into a massive story that's happening across the global economy. And when markets are closed on the weekend, it does give us an opportunity in the channel to talk about topics a bit deeper, to go broader. And today, I want to focus on a story that I'm calling the AI Cold War. You may have seen reports that China's economy is slowing. We know that the US is cutting off advanced AI chips that are exported around the world. And energy tensions in the Middle East are continuing to rise. Now, those three stories, even on their own, are massive stories. But when you put them together, it's creating something much bigger. It's creating what many fear is a technological standoff, or what I'm calling the AI Cold War. And if that's true, it has enormous implications for companies that power the AI revolution, the semiconductor industry. Because it leads us to the next question, and we have to wonder, what will China do next? What's their next move? And the answer to that question could very well determine the future for many companies in this space like NVIDIA, Micron, AMD, Taiwan Semiconductor. This video today, we're going to break down the forces behind what I'm calling the AI Cold War and why it could reshape the entire semiconductor landscape. If you haven't done it already, hit like, hit subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you spending the time on the channel. So first, let's talk about China's economic pressure. And to understand what's happening today, we need to start with China's economy. For almost 30 years, China ran one of the most powerful economic engines the world had ever seen. Manufacturing exploded. Infrastructure was built at an historic scale, and hundreds of millions of people moved into the middle class. But that growth model today is facing very serious limits. I'm going to pull us over to an article that was published in the Wall Street Journal, and its focus is that China admits it has an economic problem. A new GDP target concedes Beijing can't pretend much longer. And if you dive down into the highlighted area here, it says economic reality for all of us in the end. Yes, economic reality comes to all of us in the end. And yes, even the Chinese Communist Party. And so officials, they reduced their economic growth target to the lowest level since 1991. And this is something that we saw in the news, and it's rocking the global economy, I would say, overall, and creating some uncertainty into the market. But there's three issues that China is facing right now, or three problems that are difficult for them to solve at the same time. One is the demographic issue. So China's population is aging rapidly, and the workforce is shrinking. So that means there's fewer workers supporting more retirees, which slows economic growth. The second problem is the property market. For years, real estate was the backbone of China's economy. Developers built entire cities ahead of demand. And housing became one of the main ways that many Chinese households stored wealth. But that system began to crack when major developers like the Evergrande Group collapsed under enormous debt loads. And once the confidence in the housing market cracked or started to weaken, consumer spending followed. And then there's the third challenge, and probably the biggest challenge that China is facing right now. They are trying to shift their economy from one that was built on manufacturing and construction to an economy that is built on technology and innovation. And that transition is proving to be extremely difficult, because the industry that China needs to dominate next is the very one that the United States is trying hardest to control. That's artificial intelligence. That's what I want to talk about next. Artificial intelligence, as you know, is not just another technology cycle. It's becoming the foundation for everything from cloud computing to defense systems. And at the center of the AI revolution are very specific type of semiconductors, AI accelerators. Today, the global leader in those chips is NVIDIA. Their GPUs manage and power most of the large AI training centers used by companies such as Microsoft, Meta, Google. But here's where the geopolitical aspect enters the picture as well. I'm going to pull over another article that you may have seen. We talked about it on the channel yesterday, and it's around the U.S. mulling rules for AI chip exports. And so they're requiring U.S. investments for foreign firms. And if I pull down, this is what I talked about yesterday, that they're discussing regulatory framework on exporting AI chips to other countries, that if countries, and this would be like China, are looking to import 200,000 or more of GPUs, advanced GPUs, to help them meet the demand in their country, the U.S. is mulling over regulations that will require an investment in the U.S. So that also is putting some significant strain on China overall in this space. And the U.S. is continuing, as we've seen, some of their moves to tighten the export restrictions on these advanced semiconductors heading to China. The goal is simple for the U.S. to slow China's ability to develop cutting-edge artificial intelligence systems. It's purely a national security concern for the U.S. and making sure that we don't lose the race in artificial intelligence. And those restrictions not only affect China, but they also affect companies like NVIDIA and other chip makers like AMD, but they also affect critical manufacturing suppliers like ASML. So in practice, it means that China cannot easily access the most advanced AI chips to train large language models and the next generation machine learning systems. And that puts Beijing in a difficult position. Because with AI becoming the defining technology of the next generation, or next decade, falling behind could have enormous economic and military consequences for China. So China faces a choice right now: accept technological dependence on the West or accelerate its own semiconductor ecosystem at an unprecedented pace and scale. And that brings us to the next major pressure point that China faces: energy. Currently, China is the world's largest manufacturing economy. Factories run on energy, shipping runs on energy. Their entire industrial system depends heavily on imported oil. In fact, more than 70% of China oil today comes from overseas, much of it from the Middle East. I want to show you an article. I'm going to jump to the next one on that, guys, and just show you a breakdown. You can see kind of a look in 2025 where China's crude oil were supplied from. And you can see major suppliers like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait. In the other group, it's Venezuela and Iran. The reality is about 50%, close to 50% of China's oil today comes from the Middle East. And we know the impact that has with the geopolitical crisis is happening with Operation Epic Fury right now and the strain that is putting on it. It is showing us that any instability in that Persian Gulf supply route causes major concerns, not only to China, or will cause concerns to China, it's causing concerns across the entire globe. A huge portion of the world's supply, we've mentioned, it's about 20% of the global world supply runs through that narrow channel every day. If shipping becomes disrupted, which we've seen, oil prices spike rapidly. And I want to show you that next, because we're going to just take a look at the increasing growth of Brent crude oil. We can see that it's closing in at $93 a barrel. You can see just yesterday, up $7, up almost 9%. If I pull down further, just look in the last 5 days, 13.5, just over 13.5%, 5 days, 8.5 yesterday. This is causing significant pressure and economic pressure on China overall as well. It's just the increasing cost, their reliance on imported oil from the Middle East, and the increasing cost of that cost per barrel. So you have three powerful forces that are converging on China at the same time: a slowing domestic economy, restricted access to advanced chips, and the energy concerns tied to a global conflict. Under those circumstances, governments typically do one of two things. They double down on strategic industries, or they advance conflict wars to help stimulate their own economies. For China, that strategic industry would be the semiconductors and artificial intelligence. And if they were to advance conflict or war to help stimulate their economy, we all know that there is a island targeted just off their coast that would probably be the target of that conflict. But first, let's talk a little bit about the strategic industries that we see. It says, if China cannot easily buy the most advanced chips in the world, they're faced with a choice that their next logical step is to build them themselves. And Beijing has already been investing enormous resources into domestic semiconductor development. Companies like Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, or SMIC, is attempting to close the technology gap with Taiwan Semiconductor. But building a cutting-edge semiconductor fab or a cutting edge semiconductor industry is incredibly complex. It requires advanced lithography tools, precision manufacturing equipment, specialized materials, and years of engineering expertise. And that's why restrictions on companies like AMSL are so significant to China, are hurting China, because without access to the most advanced lithography machines, producing leading edge chips becomes extremely difficult. But China isn't likely to give up. They're more likely to pursue several parallel strategies, in my opinion. First, it will be a massive state investment in domestic semiconductor firms. Second would be a rapid expansion in AI data centers using any hardware that they could find. And then third would be an aggressive effort to build alternative supply chains through Asia or other parts of the developing world. And here's where the story becomes especially interesting for us as investors, because even if China struggles to build the most advanced GPUs, artificial intelligence still requires enormous amounts of something else: memory. That's right, folks. Training and running modern AI models consume staggering amounts of memory. High bandwidth, DRAM, massive storage capacities. So every AI cluster needs thousands of GPUs. And those GPUs also require huge volumes of memory to function effectively. That creates demand for companies like Micron, Samsung, SK Hynix, even other players in the space like Western Digital, Seagate Technology, and SanDisk. This is where the AI Cold War becomes particularly interesting, because even if China is restricted from buying the most advanced GPUs, it will still need enormous memory capacity to run their AI infrastructure domestically. That means that the global AI arms race could accelerate demand across large parts of the semiconductor industry. In other words, geopolitical competition may end up increasing semiconductor spending worldwide. Now let's get to the second part that I mentioned, which was, stimulating your economy through conflict or a war. And that's the final piece of the puzzle that investors cannot ignore, which is Taiwan. The island is home to Taiwan Semiconductor, which produces a majority of the world's most advanced chips. Everything from AI accelerators to smartphones depends on those fabrication plants. That makes Taiwan one of the most strategically important pieces of real estate in the global technology supply chain. Some analysts are concerned that China will advance, or with their growing economic pressure, that China could push towards more aggressive stance or actions in that region, particularly focused against Taiwan. But in reality, in my opinion, it's very complicated for China, because a direct conflict with Taiwan would very likely devastate the entire semiconductor chain and could further damage China's own economy in the process. So the more likely outcome we could see would be continued pressure rather than outright confrontation. Military exercises, political pressure, economic influence, all with the design to slowly reshape the balance of power without triggering catastrophic conflict in the area. So when we step back and we look at the big picture, something very important is happening. China's economy is slowing. The US is restricting access to advanced AI chips. Energy security is becoming more uncertain in the world today. And those pressures are pushing China, or the world's second largest economy, to accelerate its own technology ecosystem. That's why I call this moment the AI Cold War. Not because we're moving tanks, you see tanks moving across borders, because the most important battle for the next decade may be fought inside the semiconductor fab and the AI data center. And here's the part of the story that makes it interesting, or what investors should be paying attention to. If the AI Cold War accelerates, governments around the world are going to pour enormous amounts of money into semiconductor infrastructure. Not just GPUs, but memory, manufacturing equipment, and advanced packaging. And that raises an interesting question for all of us as investors. Which companies are positioned to benefit the most from this spending? Because the obvious answer may not be the correct one. In my next video that I'll drop tomorrow, I'm going to break down the companies that could quietly become some of the biggest winners in this global AI arms race. So if you're interested in companies powering the next AI infrastructure boom, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notifications, and get my video tomorrow. Take care, guys. I hope you have a great Saturday.